Today's topic is a broad overview of the politics of contemporary Ireland. This is a socialist Republican analysis of the current situation. Um, just for your information, this is the first slide. We're going to have several slides to run through, and the flag in the background is what's known as the Irish Starry Plough, which is the flag of Labour. It's always incorporated into the Republican flag, so that are at the head of every parade. Um, and the two figures at the back, just in case you don't know, the figure on the right is probably more recognizable. That's James Connolly, who was executed by the British in 1916 after the 1916 Rising. He was a socialist and Labour organizer and also a staunch Republican, Irish Republican. And the fellow on the left there, that's Seamus Costello, who I think is a great underwritten figure in the country. He was a labor organizer. He was also a active member of the IRA and later on the INLA. And he formed the Irish Republican Socialist Party in 1974 when they split from what was then the official Republican movement. Anyway, he is definitely a character worth looking at. If you can, there is quite a good video about him. The provider of the video is Marxism Today, which is a sort of Maoist group as far as I can work out. Anyway, but it is a very good video. Right, so we'll move on. Right, so in 1990s, the late 1990s, between the it actually took much longer than this, but the big one that everybody knows about is the Good Friday Agreement, of course. But it was a long process, and it carried on basically from the start of the 90s, and it was only really resolved by about 2005, 2006, something like that. And this was agreed, as we all know, by Tony Blair and what's his face and Bill Clinton, and Bertie Ahern. He's the Irish Taoiseach in Dublin, and the leaders of the various different groups in the north. So basically, Gerry Adams for Sinn Féin and John Hume for the SDLP, and I think it was at the time it was just the official unionists, but later on, of course, the Paisleyites didn't like being left out of that big a chance for glory and all the rest of it. So they had to come in, and basically that's what the whole interim period was all about, was trying to get them on board as well for the agreement. So proceed on. So this ended up with a rather strange configuration here. That's Ian Paisley around about 2010, I think, with Martin McGuinness of Sinn Féin, Ian Paisley being of the Democratic Unionist Party. And there's a sort of sardonic term for these two once they got going in Ireland, and we were calling them the Chuckle Brothers, because they were always smiling together and they're getting on really, really grand, despite the fact that they were completely, so we would be led to believe, from opposite ends of the pole. So there was a big fanfare over this agreement, and as I say, it spans a couple of decades really, before it was established. And of course, shortly after it was established, it fell apart because of Brexit started up, and then the unionists wanted to make hay out of that, or dissident unionists did. And once Paisley was out of the picture, then Jeffrey Donaldson became leader of of the Democratic Unionist Party. You may or may not know that he has actually just been recently convicted on all counts of sexual abuse of minors way back in the 1980s. And he is awaiting the verdict of that. So he may, well, I hope he goes to jail, but you never know because he's probably in the Masons and what have you. And they sort of tried to overturn the whole thing, and eventually the British brought it back direct rule. So basically, the assembly, which was supposed to have powers over devolved powers over Northern Ireland, ended up not having that at all, and we're back to square one again with direct rule from from Westminster. And the only real difference is that there isn't, at least people are not on a large scale anyway, blowing um, each other's brains out. But on all other counts, it's much the same, I'm afraid to say. And the British government seems to be quite happy with that. I'm quite sure British intelligence is happy with that, and I'll tell you why. Because the since the Good Friday Agreement, there've been more peace walls. Have you heard of the peace walls? Peace walls are the things that are supposed to prevent violence, but basically what they do is they divide working class communities on a pretty much a permanent basis, and so it's very difficult for people to combine on anything. And it means that the that each working class estate just becomes a silo for one, uh, either nationalist position or a loyalist one. So this is the bind that the Good Friday Agreement actually encouraged and allowed to accelerate. So what has been achieved and what hasn't. So on the glitzy end of things, then there was things like this here. This is the Peace Bridge in Derry, which connects from one side of the river to the other. It's supposed to be symbolic because one side of the river was traditionally Protestant and the other side was traditionally Catholic. But it's a bridge. It's quite a nice bridge, but that's beside the point. Um, that just shows, and that was built on EU money, so that's where all the money for all the glitzy fluffy stuff came over from the EU. And yes, there are things like multiple language signposts now, so you've got in some places you've got both Irish and English and things like this here, but it's all very tokenistic in my point of view, because the reality is more like this here. Um, this is poverty index. We can see pretty much that. the same distribution of wealth, the blue areas being uh, considerably wealthier, and the red areas obviously being the least wealthy areas. And you can see that it nothing much has really changed. The big the big difference would be that now some of the areas that are on this map, which are deprived, are Protestant areas as well as Catholic areas. But in terms of the of the map here, I mean this. If you were to overlay a map of the sectarian headcount in Northern Ireland, it would pretty much correlate. As I say, there are some exceptions, but it would pretty much correlate with with the sectarian map. So there isn't really, as I say, a huge amount of difference in real terms. And this is the real terms as well. So it's food banks and it's unemployment offices, different, difficult to get jobs, and the very difficult to get housing, and so. So there you have that just gives you an example of what basic life is like for most people across across the the statelet. And then we come to the police. Now, one of the big things about the police was well, the army was taken off the streets, so the army is no longer present at all. The That is the British Army, of course. The the and the so-called Ulster Defence Regiment, which is basically a sectarian um, death squad, for want of a better word. It has been disbanded altogether. Well, it hasn't been disbanded. What has happened is that they have actually been incorporated into the Royal Irish Regiment, which is still going. Um, and but obviously the paramilitary elements are no longer active, and in fact the Royal Irish Regiment's no longer stationed in in the uh, in the north of Ireland. We have the so-called reformed police. I'm sure anybody who's seen the movie Kneecap will see this is supposed to be the PISNI, or the Police Service of Northern Ireland, in the movie, and you would hardly notice any difference with them and their forerunners, the Royal Ulster Constabulary, and this is the case. There was an initial intention to make the numbers um, much more correlating with the people who with the sectarian headcount in the country, but it didn't really work out. Catholics are no longer interested in recruiting anymore. They obviously feel that it hasn't changed very much at all. And I mean, there are some changes. I mean, they're not wandering around with rifles and pistols anymore as they used to. So that is a change. but these are what we call the ice cream vans. Now, these are because the normal police vehicle is a la is it looks like a police car over here. So it looks almost exactly like a police car over here. But the difference um the difference occurs once there is trouble. And once there's trouble, these old Land Rovers, armored Land Rovers from the days in the past, which have now been painted white instead of their former grey. They're trundled out, and they still have the plastic bullets, and they still have the water cannon, and if necessary, they would still have at least sidearms if they needed them, and they would also have other. Uh, I'm sure they still do rifle training as well. So this is the so-called reformed police force, and in fact, a lot of the new recruits are people who've come over from England, Scotland, or Wales to fill the gaps because Catholics are disaffected with how it's being run, and the only way that they can prevent it reverting to form is by bringing over police from from the island of Britain. So you're back to square one again, basically. And then we have the three main parties. So there's or the three main. Um, this is Sinn Féin. So you got this is Mary Lou MacDonald. She's the current head of Sinn Féin. And you've possibly heard of Michelle O'Neill. Michelle O'Neill is the Sinn Féin Premier of Northern Ireland, believe it or not. But of course, because the assembly is basically defunct, it's a premiership in name only, and everybody is quite happy with that. On the Unionist and the British end of things, because it means things don't move on. So Sinn Féin are the only sort of left-ish party that is like a mass party, and it's on both that exists on both sides of the border. Um, so you have to take account of it in terms of that. I find a lot of their socialist claims are a bit posturing and not really that that totalist, in fact, but they are broadly a left party, and they are in power technically within the six counties in the north, and also they are um, the main party in the opposition in the south. So we will shortly discuss as to why they haven't managed to form a coalition. It's basically it's a PR system in Ireland, so you get lots of small parties, and Sinn Féin would need to cobble together to form a parliamentary group within the Dáil, which is the southern parliament. They would need to be able to get a good coalition going, but at the last minute, the Greens split ship, and they went over to the current government, and so so Sinn Féin have never been able to take part in either part, in fact, but they've never been in government, even at least on paper, even in the in the 26 counties. Right. So this is the opposition here. That's actually Donaldson himself, I think. So the unionists are basically going nowhere. They're just going backwards the whole time. What they were wanting to do nowadays is to remove the Northern Ireland Protocol, which is part and parcel of the whole Good Friday Agreement. It basically, without the Northern Ireland Protocol, the whole and with Britain now, after Brexit, being separate from the EU, there's no way it would work. So that's where they want to go back to, but they're a shrinking party, and we'll discuss why that is. Um, right, the Alliance Party, when I was living there, the Alliance Party were basically just a bunch of middle class liberals, both Catholic and Protestant. It's sort of changed a bit. It hasn't changed enormously, as you can probably gather from this picture, but these are sort of leadership type people. Basically, it still is a very middle class and middle of the road party, but in the terms of Northern Ireland, what it's doing is it's actually attracting the votes from younger Protestant people, especially, who don't want to vote for the old unionist bloc anymore. And this has made huge inroads into the traditional unionist parties. And the Alliance Party is prepared to go along with the border poll and various other things. It wants to retain the protocol, and it would probably like to move towards a united Ireland at some point, if it can be arranged, without any petrol bombs or whatever being thrown. So that's them. Um, right. So we move on to 26 counties as promised. These two glum clowns here, or the fellow on the left there, that's Micheál Martin. He's the current Taoiseach. And then his deputy or Taoiseach is Simon Harris. Now, the interesting thing about these two is that after independence, Ireland had two main parties. One both were derived out of the Civil War. That included so Fine Gael were the pro-treaty forces, and Fianna Fáil were the anti-treaty. And initially, although they're both very conservative parties, if you can imagine, it's not even Labour and Conservative, it's more like Republican, Democratic in the United States. You know, there's right, there's left. Well, there's not really much of a left in either of them, actually, but they're mostly very, very conservative parties. Anyway, they've made up now, and they are in a joint government in Dublin, and they are carrying on the same neoliberal policies you might expect of a neocolonial entity like the current Dublin government, and they are overseeing the economy is basically it used to be totally geared towards providing resources for Britain, but now it's moved towards low tax rates, very low tax rates. American and EU companies flock into the 26 counties to make a fortune. And then they leave without leaving any of that money behind. So and they take advantage of the low wages and everything else. And so that's what these two preside over in the South. And by coming together, they prevented Sinn Féin from taking office. Um, so that shows how left-wing Fianna Fáil are, in fact. They're not left-wing at all. So Dublin is full of these new type buildings, which we can see all over the world, in fact, but sort of in these sort of buildings, uh, they characterize the high tech and finance worlds and um, neoliberal policies which exist over much of the world. And you can find these buildings in Dublin, pretty much nowhere else, but you can find them in Dublin. You can find a few in Belfast, but not very many. A few in Cork, but it's mainly Dublin, and this is where what they had the nerve to call the Celtic Tiger taking off. And but the reality is more like this here. So um, for most people, an increasing number of people are becoming homeless in both parts of Ireland, but uh, it's really quite bad. You can see people begging on the streets of Dublin everywhere you go, and same in Belfast, actually, to be quite good, and in many other places. So there's a big housing crisis because the social housing that was built by Fianna Fáil in the 1940s, 50s, 60s, that all came to an end, and nothing's been built since. Much the same as here, in fact, in a sort of way. Um, so there you go. That's what the situation is for most people. And in fact, the poverty map would look a little bit similar to the one that we had a look at in Northern Ireland. The main exception being that if you could the blue area is around Belfast and mainly around in Northern Ireland, whereas the blue area in the Republic would be mostly orientated around Dublin. So we'll move on to social movements now. So this was the water charges protests, which has showed quite a lot of potential here for what could have been. Unfortunately, it was only very partially successful. They achieved some concessions, but the water charges remained, and but what it did show it did show the potential for spontaneous action taken by by people. In some respects, it was a little bit like the poll tax thing in Britain in terms of mobilizing and popularity. Sinn Féin came a bit along a bit late to the party, and was seen as being a controlling influence rather than a kindling influence. Unfortunately, but that's what happened to water charges movement, even though it still remains very, very important. I think we have to look at it in those terms. It shows what is possible in Ireland. And similarly, on the course of civil rights and and freedom of choice for women, there's been huge, I mean, quite outstanding um, changes that have, in fact, put the six counties into shame. The six counties actually never had abortion either, and they were only forced into permitting abortion in the in the north by the events in the south. So that shows once again, that what is possible. But unfortunately, it's only in a very narrow field. It's not connected to wider social 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 struggles. Another thing is Ireland's neutrality is constantly under threat, especially with Micheál Martin and Simon Harris at the helm. They are feeling the pressure that Ireland should give up on its neutrality altogether and join NATO. It's important to point out that Ireland's never been properly neutral. It was sort of a nod and a wink, even back in the Second World War, to the to the Allies, especially once America entered the war. Um, and although there are no NATO bases in the Republic, the US is able to land transports going to for its wars in the world via Shannon Airport. Shannon Airport, they seem to have they're allowed to have a base there. So, technically, um, Ireland is actually not no longer a neutral country, and of course the occupied six counties in the north, they are also technically part of NATO because Britain is. There are no NATO bases up there, but it all becomes a lever of pressure that can be applied to say Sinn Féin. If Sinn Féin wants to reunite the country, they'll say, yeah, okay, you can have that eventually, but you'll have to join NATO, and that'll make it easier, and all this sort of nonsense. So a few people are bringing people's attention to this whenever there's a new insidious move to get rid of Ireland's neutrality altogether. People take action, like you can see in this picture. And then there's a connection to Palestine, of course, which is very important. The Because there is a big connection, as you can probably understand, why there would be. And I don't want to go into in great detail, but there is a great groundswell of support for Palestine in Ireland, and that has to be reflected by the actions of the government to a degree. But the government, the Micheál Martin and Simon Harris, would far rather just be letting it all the fact that certain Israeli firms are working within the 26 counties and all the rest of it. They would rather that was all um, uh, uh, went without notice under the rug. Now you might think this is another one of these protests, and it's not entirely the case. Now, this is a warning sign, in fact, because many of the Irish traditional symbols of republicanism have been hijacked by a group of foreign-sponsored far-right groups. Now, I suspect that the vast majority of the people in this picture are not far-right people, but the people who are carrying the flags probably are. And this took place last year. There was a fuel a fuel dispute that involved truckers and small farmers who were understandably worried about the raise in the price of fuel, and they decided to spontaneously to to organize pickets, and the and so this is one of them in Dublin. And it was very apolitical. They were saying that we don't want to take sides with anybody, any of the main parties in in the in the Republic. So, but these small far right groups all got together, and no doubt shed loads of money coming in from Elon Musk and people like that, and they just turned up anyway. And then the problem is that these people are mingling and giving their slant on the picture with ordinary people who are not very politicized, and ordinary ordinary working class and small farmer people, and it could be a fertile ground if they manage to get established. That's something we have to watch. This is another picture from that actual protest. There, this is a farmer, obviously brought in his tractor. He can't afford to run his tractor anymore. So that was what that was all about. It did actually achieve some concessions, I believe, but the problem is these far right people starting to spread the seeds of their poison within a so-called apolitical social movement. And then this shows the utter ridiculous of it. So this is actually in Belfast. And on the right there, you have the loyalists, loyalist people associated with paramilitaries and other um, extreme loyalist groups. And then on the left, you have a group of people who came up from Dublin, especially to show solidarity with these people here, and on the grounds of stop the boats and all this sort of stuff. So it's really quite unbelievable, especially when you consider what the context of the people on the right are, and then the people on the left must be round the bend. I don't understand where they're coming from at all. And this went up last year. Every year, I don't know how much you know about Ireland, but or the occupied part of Ireland, but they have these parades, the so-called orange parades, every 12th of July, because that was the date that William of Orange defeated Catholic King James at the Battle of the Boyne in Ireland. So they have all these celebrations. Now the police do not never interfere in these. They just let them even though everybody knows that they're all organized by loyalist paramilitaries nowadays. Um, and they get a whole load of pallets. You can see the piles of pallets there. And then at the top, they put some symbols of people and symbols that they don't like. So at the top, you can see an Irish tricolour. They obviously don't like that. Um, but what's really nauseating about it is that that last year they actually put a boat on top of it filled with black dummies. So this was they're allowed to get away with this. You know, the police service of Northern Ireland just turned a blind eye while they were doing this. Um, and this year, I'm glad to say that that particular bonfire, while it was still being built, they hadn't put the things on top of it yet, but they built the the rest of it. And some local Republican youth got hold of a drone, turned the drone into a petrol bomb, and burned this monstrosity down before the scheduled date and before they put their symbols up on top of it. And I suspect there will be more happening along these lines in the um, next few days and the run up to the 12th of July. And to just reinforce what their real agenda is quite obvious with this sign here. So Packies out, obviously that's a generic term for anybody who looks sort of vaguely Muslim or vaguely brown skinned or whatever. And then on the end they put and tags out, and tags, of course, is a derogatory word for Irish Catholics. So come the 12th of July, they may be burning everybody out once again. I'm finishing off now. This is the last slide. So this is the protest in Belfast against the recent attacks, the sort of pogrom that took place in Belfast. Once again, it was loyalist paramilitaries overwhelmingly that were the main culprits. And this was the big protest in the centre of Belfast against it. And I think this sign says, gets the message across 100%.